The Galactic Council chamber fell silent as Commander Vexthor raised his primary appendage, gesturing toward the human delegation with barely concealed contempt. His crystalline exoskeleton refracted the chamber's bioluminescent lighting into 1,000 mocking shards of color. Humans, he announced, his voice resonating through the translator implants of every species present, are physically inadequate for frontline combat duty. Their bone structure is weak, their muscle density insufficient, and their neural processing speeds are glacial compared to proper warrior races. Katniss stood motionless in the human delegation section, her jaw tight but her expression carefully neutral. Beside her, Neo shifted his weight slightly, the only indication of his irritation. They had traveled 3 months through slipspace to attend this council session, hoping to secure humanity's place among the Coalition's military forces. Instead, they were being dismissed like children asking to play with weapons they couldn't comprehend. "We have reviewed your species' ballistic weaponry," Vexthor continued, his mandibles clicking with what passed for laughter among the Crethean species. "Primitive chemical propulsion creating massive kinetic recoil. Your own historical records show humans injuring themselves with these devices. No properly evolved species would tolerate such inefficiency." A ripple of agreement passed through the council chamber. The insectoid Velkari chittered their approval. The methane-breathing Zoran pulsed their consent through their atmospheric tanks. Even the normally diplomatic Synthara delegation remained conspicuously silent. "Perhaps," Vexthor said, his compound eyes glinting with what might have been amusement, "a demonstration would illuminate the matter. Human delegate, would you care to attempt handling a standard Coalition assault weapon? Or perhaps," his mandibles spread wider, "one of your own primitive firearms?" Katniss felt every eye in the chamber turn toward her. Neo's hand moved slightly as if to touch her arm in warning, but stopped. They both knew what was at stake. If humanity couldn't prove its worth here, they would be relegated to support roles. Cargo handlers, technicians, the species that stayed home while others fought for the Coalition's survival against the encroaching Voidborn threat. "Commander," Katniss said, her voice carrying clearly despite the chamber's vast size, "I accept your demonstration. However, I'll need proper ammunition. Live rounds, not training blanks." A murmur rippled through the assembled delegates. Vexthor's posture shifted into something that might have been surprise. "You understand," he said slowly, "that a human frame cannot absorb the recoil from sustained fire. Your shoulder joint would dislocate. Your wrist bones would fracture. This is not speculation. It is biological fact." "Then it should be a very brief demonstration," Katniss replied. 20 minutes later, the council had reconvened in the military testing arena, adjacent to the main chamber. Katniss stood in the center of the obsidian floor, facing a firing range that stretched 200 meters toward reinforced ballistic gel targets. Beside her, a weapons table held an assortment of Coalition firearms, sleek energy weapons with minimal recoil, and, at the far end, a single human weapon that Vexthor had somehow procured from Earth's military archives. It was a Ma Deuce, a Browning M2.50 caliber heavy machine gun, manufactured sometime in the early 21st century. The weapon was nearly as old as human spaceflight itself, a relic of an era when humanity still fought itself instead of existential threats from beyond the stars. "This," Vexthor announced to the assembled crowd of delegates who had followed to witness the spectacle, "is what humans call a heavy machine gun. It fires projectiles at supersonic speeds using controlled explosions. The recoil force is approximately 4,500 joules per shot. For comparison, a Crethean warrior of my size could manage perhaps 3 shots before structural damage would require medical intervention." He gestured toward Katniss with one blade-tipped appendage. "Please demonstrate your species' capability." Katniss approached the weapon. She'd trained with the Ma Deuce during her mandatory service in Earth's Defense Force, back when humanity was still learning that it wasn't alone in the universe. The weapon was exactly as she remembered, brutal, elegant in its simplicity, and utterly unforgiving to anyone who didn't respect it. She checked the ammunition belt, verified the chamber was clear, and took her position. The correct stance was everything with a weapon like this: feet shoulder-width apart, knees slightly bent, body weight distributed to absorb and redirect force rather than resist it. Humans had learned these lessons through centuries of warfare, written in blood and necessity. Neo watched from the sideline, his expression carefully blank. But Katniss knew him well enough to read the tension in his shoulders. He believed in her, but belief didn't stop physics. "Whenever you're ready," Vexthor said. His tone suggested he expected her to back down. To admit the demonstration was foolish. Instead, Katniss chambered the first round, settled her weight, and squeezed the trigger. The Maw Deuce roared to life. The sound was apocalyptic in the enclosed arena, a thundering percussion that made several delegates flinch despite their distance and protective barriers. Brass casings ejected in a glittering arc, clattering against the obsidian floor. Downrange, the ballistic gel targets disintegrated under the sustained barrage. Katniss held the trigger down, her body moving with the weapon rather than against it, absorbing the massive recoil through her legs and core. The barrel climbed slightly, and she corrected without conscious thought, keeping the rounds on target. Her face remained expressionless, her breathing controlled. 50 rounds, 75, 100. She released the trigger, only when the ammunition belt ran dry. The silence that followed was profound. Katniss stepped back from the weapon, rolled her shoulders once casually as if she'd just finished a light warm-up, and turned to face Commander Vexithor. She didn't smile. She didn't need to. "You were saying something about inadequate bone structure?" she asked. Neo allowed himself a small grin. Vexthor's mandibles had frozen mid-position. Around the arena, delegates whispered furiously to one another in a dozen different languages. The Velkari delegation was chittering rapidly, their antennae vibrating with what their species expressed as shock. "Impossible," Vexthor finally managed. "The structural stress alone should have what?" Katniss interrupted. "Broken me? Commander, humans aren't strong because we evolved on a paradise world. We're strong because Earth tried to kill us for millions of years and we were too stubborn to die. We learned to make tools because we had to. We learned to endure pain because we had no choice. And we learned to work with recoil instead of against it, because that was the difference between survival and extinction." She gestured toward the smoking machine gun. "That weapon is over 200 years old. We built it before we had computers, before we had spaceflight, before we knew there was anyone else out here in the dark. And we built it to last because that's what humans do. We build things that work, and we make them work even when physics says we shouldn't." Neo stepped forward, joining Katniss in the center of the arena. "Humanity requests formal admission to Coalition military service," he said, his voice carrying the weight of their entire species' hopes. "Not as support personnel, as frontline combat operatives." Commander Vexthor was silent for a long moment. Then slowly he raised his appendages in the Crithian gesture of respect, a movement Katniss had never seen him make toward any species. "Request granted," he said quietly, "and humanity welcomed." Katniss reloaded without blinking.